The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, their pale glow seeping across the tiled ceiling and into every corner of the room. The air was heavy with chemicals, sterile, bitter, and cold, the kind of chill that belonged not to night or winter, but to steel and formaldehyde. Evelyn Whitaker's body shivered, though she could not move. For a moment she thought she had slipped beneath ice, trapped where no warmth could reach her. Then came awareness, the hard metal beneath her, the thin sheet pulled over her face, and the unmistakable realization that she lay on a morgue table. Her mouth was dry, her tongue leaden, the faint taste of something acrid lingering at the back of her throat. She tried to cry out, but only a broken rasp escaped, weaker than a whisper. Terror rooted itself in her chest. She forced her eyelids shut, willing herself still, listening. Footsteps echoed on concrete. One set heavy and deliberate, the other sharp and brisk, heels striking against the floor. The sound stopped beside her, and the sheet was pulled back. Evelyn kept her eyes closed, but she felt the light press against her skin, harsh and merciless. A man's voice spoke, rough, official. Yes, that's her, Evelyn Whitaker. Her pulse hammered. She knew that voice. It was Richard, her husband. Why did he sound so cold, so detached? A woman's reply followed, calm and certain. No doubt about it. Vanessa Clark, Evelyn's closest friend, the one she had trusted with her secrets, her laughter, her fears. The words pierced deeper than the chill of the morgue. The staff member murmured something about documentation, about arrangements. Papers shuffled, a signature scrawled. Then the official steps retreated, leaving Richard and Vanessa behind. The room grew quiet, too quiet. Finally, Vanessa exhaled, a long, satisfied breath. Well, she's where she belongs now. Charleston's perfect hostess silenced. Richard chuckled under his breath. No more obstacles. Then Evelyn heard it, the wet sound of a kiss. Her chest tightened. Blood rushed in her ears. No, not possible. Not Richard and Vanessa. The conversation that followed stripped away every last shred of denial. They spoke of her estate, her assets, the way a closed casket would prevent questions. They talked about how quickly the burial should happen, how convenient her sudden death was. Each word dropped like a nail into her coffin. Evelyn wanted to scream, to sit up, to strike them both across the face. But her limbs were heavy, her breath shallow. The drug still coursed through her veins, paralyzing her body while her mind remained awake. Closed casket, Richard repeated firmly. Safer that way. No one needs to look too closely. Tomorrow she's in the ground. Vanessa laughed softly, cruelly, and then, we can live, really live. The sound of them together twisted Evelyn's stomach. These were not strangers conspiring. This was her husband, her friend, two people she had trusted more than anyone else. And they had tried to erase her. Her heartbeat thundered, but she forced her chest to rise slowly, evenly, as though breath no longer belonged to her. They could not know she lived. Not yet. Their footsteps receded, heels and soles scraping against concrete until silence returned. The cold pressed in again, oppressive and merciless. Evelyn lay there, eyes sealed, body still, rage and fear warring within her. She had been poisoned, discarded, declared dead, but she was alive. Against every intention of those who had betrayed her, she was still here. And though her body felt like stone, her mind was clear. She would not reveal herself now. Not while Richard and Vanessa believed their plan had succeeded. Not while they imagined her buried and gone. No, she would wait. Wait until the moment came when truth would cut deeper than any poison. On that steel table in the Charleston morgue, Evelyn Whitaker made her first choice as a woman returned from the dead. She would remain silent. She would remain still. She would pretend to be what they wanted her to be, lifeless, because only then would she have the chance to rise and to face them, not as a victim, but as the reckoning they never expected, The silence of the morgue was broken only by the squeak of rubber soles against the concrete floor. Michael Turner pushed open the swinging door, a clipboard tucked under his arm, his breath rising in small clouds in the refrigerated air. He was used to this world of steel tables and fluorescent lights, where death was processed and recorded like paperwork. But as he approached the body on the table, the young socialite whose sudden death had already stirred whispers across Charleston, something felt wrong. He pulled the sheet back just enough to verify identity. Evelyn Whitaker lay there, her skin pale, her lips faintly parted. Michael frowned. Instinct guided him, the kind that came from years once spent in operating rooms rather than basements. He touched her wrist, expecting cold stone beneath his fingers. Instead, there was warmth, faint but unmistakable. His heart lurched. He pressed harder, searching. A fragile beat, slow but present. For a moment, he thought he had lost his mind. But then her chest moved ever so slightly, the barest flutter of breath. Michael dropped the clipboard, the clatter echoing too loud in the chamber. He leaned close. "Ma'am," he whispered, hardly expecting an answer. A sound escaped her throat, dry and broken. "Please," the word cracked like brittle glass. "Don't tell him." Michael froze. This was no corpse. She was alive, aware, pleading. He glanced toward the door, then back to her. "Stay still," he whispered urgently. His mind raced through training long buried. The shallow respirations, the rigidity of her muscles, the weakness in her voice. It was not death. It was paralysis, drug-induced. He had seen it before in the days when he was Dr. Michael Turner, anesthesiologist. Before a colleague's betrayal cost him his career, his license, his life as he had known it. His pulse thundered. Evelyn Whitaker had not died naturally. She had been silenced. "I'll take care of you," he promised, his voice low but steady. "But you must not move. Not a sound." Step by step he worked. He marked the body as processed, shielding her from further examination. Instead of wheeling her toward autopsy, he guided the gurney toward a storage corridor rarely used. There, hidden behind crates and equipment, he kept her until the night would allow safe passage. Each action carried risk, tampering with remains, falsifying records, but Michael had already lost everything once. What was left to lose compared to a woman's life? When evening shadows fell across Charleston, he maneuvered her quietly out of the morgue and into his car. The drive to his modest home on the city's edge was tense, headlights carving through humid southern darkness. Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness, too weak to speak further. The following morning, the world above the morgue went on as if nothing had changed. The funeral was arranged quickly, almost suspiciously so. At Magnolia Cemetery, moss-draped oaks leaned over marble headstones, their shadows stretching across rows of the dead. Lanterns and candles flickered against the stone angels, casting long silhouettes that trembled in the humid air. Charleston's elite gathered, dressed in black silk and tailored suits, their whispers humming like cicadas. Cameras flashed. Local news crews circled, hungry for images of the city's tragedy. At the center of it all stood Richard Whitaker, his handkerchief pressed to his face, his shoulders heaving with the show of grief. Beside him, Vanessa Clark clung to his arm, her mascara smudged into what looked like the perfect portrait of sorrow. To the unknowing eye, they were grieving friends, united in loss. To Evelyn, who watched from a borrowed car parked far from the crowd, they were murderers in mourning clothes. Michael had insisted she stay hidden, her fragile body still recovering. But he himself slipped into the throng, his camera disguised in the pocket of his jacket. Through a hidden lens, he recorded everything. Richard's trembling voice as he spoke of his beloved wife, Vanessa's sobs that sounded a little too rehearsed, the sympathetic hands of Charleston's social circle resting on their shoulders. Every frame was evidence. Every tear shed for show was a weapon to be used later. As the casket, sealed, locked, and weighted, was lowered into the ground. The mourners bowed their heads. Richard placed his hand over the polished lid, whispering words only the cameras could catch. Vanessa leaned in close, her veil hiding the faint curve of a satisfied smile. Michael's jaw tightened. He captured it all, knowing one day this theater of grief would be exposed for what it truly was, a crime disguised as tragedy. Far away, hidden in the shadows, Evelyn waited, her body weak, her spirit burning. She had heard their whispers in the morgue. She had felt the chill of betrayal deeper than the cold of steel. Now, with Michael's help, she would bide her time. Let them believe she was gone. Let them mourn a corpse that no longer lay in that grave. The truth had not died. It lived, patient and silent, preparing for the moment when the mask of sorrow would be ripped away and Charleston would see Richard Whittaker and Vanessa Clark for who they truly were. Michael's modest home stood at the far edge of Charleston, where the city's manicured streets gave way to quieter neighborhoods and the marshland stretched toward the horizon. It was nothing like the Whittaker estate with its sweeping verandas and polished gardens, but was safe, unremarkable, a place where shadows did not follow. When he carried Evelyn inside, she was barely able to lift her head. He settled her into an old but sturdy wheelchair, easing her fragile body down as if she were porcelain that might break. The air inside was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and cedarwood. Family photos hung on the walls, their frames mismatched. Evelyn's eyes wandered across them, snapshots of a life that had once been full. A young man in scrubs, a woman smiling beside him, a child in a stroller. She turned her gaze back to Michael, sensing a story etched into those lines of memory. He noticed her searching eyes. For a moment, he looked away, his jaw tight. "I wasn't always here," he said finally, his voice low. "I used to wear the white coat. Anesthesiology. The kind of job that keeps people alive while surgeons work. I was good at it. Too good, maybe. Enough to make someone jealous." He drew in a breath, the words heavy. "Jonathan Briggs. Colleague. Friend, or so I thought. He sabotaged me. Made it look like I miscalculated during a high-profile surgery. The patient nearly died. The hospital wanted a scapegoat. Briggs made sure I was the one." Evelyn listened, her throat aching with both weakness and empathy. She had seen betrayal unfold in her own life, but hearing his story sharpened the ache. "They stripped my license," Michael continued. "My wife left soon after. Took our daughter. Said she couldn't stay with a man who was finished. I tried to fight it, but when the courts sided with her, I gave her everything. House savings. I thought maybe if they had stability it would count for something." His shoulders sagged. "Now all I have left is this job at the morgue. A paycheck, a roof, and ghosts for company." The silence that followed was filled with Evelyn's quiet breathing. She thought of her own downfall, her husband's poisoned kiss, her friend's cruel laughter in the morgue. 2 lives broken by the people they trusted most. She reached out, her hand trembling, and brushed the edge of Michael's sleeve. "We've both been left for dead," she whispered, her voice raw but steady. "But we're still here." He met her gaze then, a flicker of something like resolve sparking behind his tired eyes. While they sat in that small living room, an entirely different scene unfolded in the heart of Charleston. Richard Whittaker poured wine into crystal glasses, the ruby liquid catching the firelight in his downtown townhouse. Vanessa reclined against the velvet sofa, her lips painted in triumph. The air smelled of expensive tobacco and imported perfume. "To us," Richard toasted, raising his glass, "to a future free of chains." Vanessa clinked her glass against his, her laughter low and silky. "And to the fortune Evelyn left behind. Charleston society will never know what really happened. To them were the grieving widower and the loyal friend." Richard smiled, sharp as broken glass. "They'll never question it. Not with a closed casket. Not with the Whittaker name. By the time anyone wonders, we'll be long gone, living the life we deserve." They leaned closer, their voices dropping into conspiratorial whispers about properties to buy, travels to take, luxuries to indulge. Each word dripped with greed, a twisted celebration of what they believed was victory. Back in the quiet refuge of Michael's home, Evelyn clenched the arms of the wheelchair, her nails pressing into the worn wood. She could almost hear their voices echoing through memory, laughing over her grave. Rage burned beneath her ribs, but she did not cry out. Not yet. Instead, she swallowed her tears, her jaw tightening. Her strength was not in shouting, but in silence and waiting. They thought her gone, erased, forgotten beneath moss and marble. Let them think it. Let them bask in their stolen triumph. Because when the time came, her return would strike harder than any poison. And justice, long delayed, would not be denied. Michael worked methodically, his hands steady as he filled a small vial with Evelyn's blood. He had pulled together the equipment quietly, without the morgue's knowledge, his actions shielded by the years of training that still lingered in muscle memory. The crimson liquid swirled as he capped the tube, sealing inside it both a mystery and a weapon. "I have a friend," he told Evelyn as he slipped the vial into a padded envelope. "Henry Collins, toxicology specialist. We went through residency together. If anyone can tell us what they used on you, it's him." Her voice was weak but sure. "And if it proves Richard poisoned me, then we'll have more than suspicions. We'll have evidence," Michael answered. He pressed the package shut, his jaw tightening. "And evidence speaks louder than tears." Evelyn lowered her eyes, the memory of her last evening with Richard flooding back unbidden. She had prepared a quiet dinner, hopeful it might soften the distance that had been growing between them. He had poured the wine, his smile charming, his words gentle. They had eaten strawberries and pineapple he had sliced himself. She had laughed at something trivial. Then the world had tilted. The glass slipped from her hand, shattering across the hardwood floor, and blackness swallowed her. Now she understood that moment for what it was, the beginning of her end. Michael noticed the shadow that crossed her face, but he didn't press. Instead, he slipped out later that morning, envelope in hand, making his way through Charleston's sun-drenched streets toward the post. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, carriages rolling past tourists, church bells marking the hour. But Michael carried the quiet weight of secrets too heavy for daylight. Near the corner of King Street, he was stopped by a soft voice. "Sir, spare some change." A young woman stood there, her clothes worn thin, her scarf sun-faded. Beside her was a boy, perhaps 10 years old, clutching her hand with solemn eyes the color of amber. Michael reached into his pocket automatically, pulling out a few bills. "Here," he said gently, "get yourselves something to eat." The woman gave a grateful nod, but the boy stepped forward before she could speak. His small fingers wrapped around Michael's wrist, cool and certain. His gaze deepened, as though he were staring not at Michael's face, but through it, into some invisible current. "Don't go to work today," the boy whispered. His voice carried none of a child's hesitation. "Danger is waiting." Michael blinked. "What?" The boy's grip tightened, and for a moment Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "Please," the boy said again, his tone strangely old, heavy with warning. "Don't go." The woman touched the boy's shoulder quickly, murmuring, "Sammy," but the boy, Samuel Miller, looked at Michael one last time, his words firm. "Stay away. If you go, something will happen." Michael stood frozen on the sidewalk, heart pounding. He wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, a child's play at fortune-telling. Yet something in Sammy's eyes unsettled him, something that felt less like imagination and more like truth. He forced a small smile, slipping the bills into the woman's hand. "Take care of him," he said quietly. Then he turned away, his thoughts churning. By the time he reached the morgue that afternoon, the boy's words still echoed in his ears. Danger. Waiting. He shook his head, telling himself fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. People whispered warnings every day in this city, about storms, about sins, about omens. He had work to do. Meanwhile, back at his house, Evelyn lay in the wheelchair by the window. Sunlight fell across her legs, and she focused with every ounce of will. For days her body had been stone, her limbs unresponsive. But now, slowly she willed her toes to move. The faintest twitch, then another. Her breath caught, and a tear slid down her cheek. She curled her toes once, twice, proof that her body was not lost to her forever. The drug's grip was loosening. Her strength was returning. And with it, a promise formed deep inside her. The time would come when Richard Whittaker and Vanessa Clark would face not the illusion of death, but the living truth they had tried to bury. The call came early, dragging Richard Whittaker from a restless sleep. His head throbbed from the night before. Too much brandy, too little rest. He fumbled for the phone, irritation already sharp in his voice. Mr. Whittaker. The groundskeeper's voice cracked on the line, uneasy. Sir, there's a problem at the cemetery. The dogs. They've dug at the grave. They won't leave it alone. Richard sat up, suddenly alert. What are you babbling about? I didn't want to bother you, but the soil's disturbed. I swear, it looks like they've reached the coffin. A flush of heat rose in Richard's chest. Stay put. Don't touch a damn thing. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up, his hands trembling as he dressed. Vanessa stirred in the sheets, her voice drowsy and annoyed. What now? Nothing, he snapped. Go back to sleep. The drive through Charleston's morning mist felt endless. Spanish moss draped from the oaks, swaying in the salt air. When he arrived, the cemetery was silent but for the caw of distant crows. The groundskeeper stood pale and nervous, pointing toward the disturbed earth. Richard dropped to his knees, clawing at the soil with his bare hands. Mud caked his fingers as he tore it away. The coffin soon appeared beneath the thin layer of dirt. Its lid splintered where claws had scraped. His breath quickened. With a groan of effort, he forced it open. Inside, there was no body, no Evelyn, only burlap sacks filled with sand, neatly stacked to mimic the weight of flesh and bone. The world tilted, his vision blurred. A guttural sound escaped his throat as he staggered back. She was alive. She had to be. He pressed his fists to his temples, panic thundering in his skull. Evelyn Whittaker, the wife he had poisoned, was not in her grave. If she wasn't there, then she was somewhere, and someone had helped her. One name rose in his mind like a blade: Michael Turner, the morgue attendant. It made sense, too much sense. The man had been alone with Evelyn's body before burial, had every chance to interfere. Richard's jaw clenched. Turner had tricked him, stolen what should have been finished. By the time he left the cemetery, he was already planning. He would find this man. He would find where he lived, what he knew. And then he would finish what he had started. Across town, Michael's phone buzzed as he finished his shift. He slipped into the staff hallway to answer. Michael, it's Henry Collins. The voice on the line was brisk, but beneath it lay a current of unease. I ran the analysis you asked for. You were right to send it to me. Michael's pulse quickened. What did you find? There are traces of a neuromuscular blocker in the blood sample, a paralytic, the kind we use in anesthesiology. This isn't over-the-counter, Michael. It's hospital stock, controlled substances. Someone diverted it. Michael closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Henry continued, his tone grave. And listen, this batch could only have come from one place. Charleston General's surgical pharmacy. You know who runs that program now, don't you? A name that tasted of bitterness rose immediately. Dr. Jonathan Briggs. Michael's hand tightened on the phone. Once, Briggs had been his colleague. Once, he had orchestrated the ruin of Michael's career. And now, somehow, Briggs's name was tied to Evelyn's poisoning. Michael, Henry said firmly, this isn't just malpractice. This is attempted murder. Be careful. If Briggs knows you're digging, he won't sit quietly. Michael hung up, his mind reeling. Pieces of the puzzle were sliding into place. Evelyn had not been struck down by chance. Richard had poisoned her. Briggs had provided the means. And Vanessa had stood at his side, ready to inherit the life Evelyn was meant to live. In Michael's living room, sunlight streamed across the wheelchair where Evelyn sat, her eyes fixed on the garden beyond. She flexed her toes again, stronger this time, her lips curving with fragile hope. Each movement was a step back from the grave they had tried to place her in. Neither she nor Michael knew yet that Richard had seen the empty coffin, that suspicion had already narrowed onto them like a predator's gaze. The game had shifted. Evelyn was no longer a dead woman waiting to be forgotten. She was a living secret, and secrets in Charleston's old cemeteries and whispered parlors had a way of coming back to life. Richard Whittaker had always prided himself on control. He controlled business deals, the flow of money, the image of a perfect marriage. Even Evelyn's death, neatly orchestrated, quietly executed, had been another piece of order in his carefully drawn life. But control was slipping now, cracking like porcelain dropped on stone. The address hadn't been hard to find. A few discreet questions in the right places, a small payment slipped to someone at the hospital, and Michael Turner's residence came to light. Richard parked down the street, engine off, the humid Charleston air heavy around him. Spanish moss swayed gently from the trees, concealing him in dappled shadow. He lifted the binoculars he had brought, trained them on the modest house. His pulse spiked when the curtains shifted. A woman's silhouette moved into view, seated in a wheelchair. Pale skin, graceful hands gripping the armrests. Even from a distance, he knew. Evelyn. Alive. His breath caught. For a moment, the world tilted the way it had when he opened that coffin. He rubbed his eyes as though clearing an illusion. But when he looked again, she was still there, thin, fragile, but undeniably living. No, he muttered, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. It's not possible. Doubt gnawed at him. He remembered the night of the poisoning, how carefully he had measured the dose Briggs had procured. He had watched her glass tip, had seen her collapse. He had felt certain she was gone. And yet here she was, a ghost breathing behind a stranger's window. Inside the house, Evelyn sat in silence, the soft creak of the wheelchair the only sound as she adjusted her position. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and brewed coffee. Michael's attempt to mask the lingering scent of the morgue on his clothes. She gazed toward the window, following some instinct. When her eyes landed on the street, a chill passed through her. She could not see clearly, but she felt it. The weight of a gaze, sharp and hungry, pressing against her from the outside world. Her pulse quickened. She knew that look even unseen. Richard's eyes. Richard, outside, wrestled with panic and rage. The plan with Vanessa replayed in his mind. The whispered promises, the laughter over crystal glasses, the intoxicating certainty that Evelyn's fortune would soon be theirs. He remembered Vanessa's hand on his arm, her voice dripping with ambition. With Evelyn gone, nothing stands between us and the life we deserve. But if Evelyn was not gone, everything unraveled. The inheritance, the reputation, the freedom, all of it hinged on a coffin that now stood empty. His temples throbbed as he imagined the scandal. Newspapers screaming betrayal, investigators sniffing through his affairs, Vanessa abandoning him the moment the tide turned. He clenched his teeth, fury seething in his chest. Evelyn had cheated death, and with that, she threatened to cheat him of everything he had schemed for. Through the glass, Evelyn's hands tightened on the armrests. Her breath shortened, unease rising like a tide. She pulled the curtain shut, heart pounding. Whatever safety Michael's house had offered now felt fragile, like paper walls against a storm. Down the block, Richard lowered the binoculars, forcing himself to breathe slowly. He couldn't rush in, not yet. He needed to be certain. to know if the shadow in the wheelchair truly was his wife or merely some cruel trick of resemblance. But deep inside he knew Evelyn was alive, and Michael Turner was the one who had stolen her from the grave. As dusk settled over Charleston, Richard started the car and drove away, the decision already forming in his mind. He would return, he would find proof, and then he would end it once and for all. Back at the house, Michael Turner stepped through the front door, setting down a bag of groceries. His tie was loosened, his expression weary from the day's shift. He smiled faintly when he saw Evelyn by the window. "You're getting stronger," he said gently, unaware of how pale she looked, how her hands trembled. He did not see the shadow that had lingered outside. He did not know the danger that had already taken root at his doorstep. But Evelyn did. Her voice was too weak to warn him, her lips too heavy to form the words. All she could do was watch him move through the kitchen, her unease coiling tighter with each passing second. The predator had found their hiding place, and the fragile calm they had built was about to break. The night settled heavy over Charleston, the air thick with the briny scent of the nearby marshes. Michael had gone to his small study, leaving Evelyn resting in the living room, the glow of a lamp casting soft light across her fragile frame. She had begun to regain some strength in her hands, but her legs remained stubbornly weak. Each creak of the old house unsettled her, yet she told herself it was only the wind brushing the shutters, the familiar groan of wood in the southern humidity. But outside, another presence lurked. Richard Whittaker slipped through the shadows with the silence of a predator. His tailored jacket was gone, replaced by dark clothes that blended into the night. In his right hand, a knife gleamed faintly beneath the porch light before he slid it into his sleeve. His face was set in grim determination. He had not come for answers. He had come to finish what should have been finished days ago. The back door was locked, but locks meant little to Richard. With a firm twist and push, the old frame gave way. He moved into the kitchen, the faint scent of coffee and lemon cleaner betraying the life that pulsed inside this modest home. His eyes narrowed as he listened for movement. Then he saw her. Evelyn sat in the wheelchair near the window, her profile illuminated by lamplight. Alive, real. The proof of his failure seared him with rage. All of Charleston could have been sleeping, but in that moment the world shrank to the distance between him and her. She sensed him before she saw him, the prickle of awareness along her skin, the heaviness in the air. When her eyes flicked toward the kitchen doorway and caught the silhouette of the man she had once called husband, her breath caught in her throat. "Richard!" Her voice broke, half whisper, half accusation. He stepped forward, the knife sliding free from his sleeve. His smile was cold, feral. "You should have stayed dead." Before he could close the distance, a blur of fur lunged between them. Rusty, Michael's loyal dog, teeth bared, hurled himself at Richard's arm. The knife slashed downward, meeting flesh. The dog yelped but did not release, clamping onto Richard's wrist with desperate loyalty. Richard roared, shaking his arm violently. The blade struck again, this time piercing Rusty's side. Blood darkened the fur instantly, dripping onto the hardwood. The dog whimpered, but still pressed forward, buying Evelyn precious seconds. Evelyn's scream split the night. "Michael!" Her cry carried through the house like an alarm. Papers scattered as Michael shot from his chair in the study, the sound of struggle and the desperate bark guiding him. He burst into the room, his eyes landing on the nightmare unfolding. Richard towering over Evelyn, Rusty bleeding at his feet, the knife raised again. "Get away from her!" Michael charged. The collision was brutal. The two men crashed against the wall, the knife clattering to the floor before Richard snatched for it again. They grappled, fists landing with sickening thuds. Richard's strength was fueled by panic and fury, Michael's by righteous desperation. Evelyn could do nothing but watch, her heart slamming in her chest, every breath a prayer that Michael would not fall. With a surge, Michael twisted Richard's arm back, slamming his wrist to the floor until the knife slipped free. He kicked it out of reach, then pinned Richard against the wall, his voice raw. "It's over." But Richard thrashed wildly, spitting venom. "You'll regret this. She belongs in the ground." Michael didn't waste another word. With his free hand, he reached for the phone on the table, dialing with frantic precision. 911, he barked. "Intruder with a weapon. Send units now." Evelyn's tears spilled as she pulled herself from the wheelchair enough to reach Rusty. The dog lay bleeding, his breath shallow but defiant. She pressed her hands to his wound, whispering broken pleas. "Stay with me. Please, Rusty. Don't leave me, too." Sirens wailed in the distance, the sound cutting through the humid night. Within minutes, flashing blue and red lights washed over the windows. Officers stormed through the front door, weapons drawn. Michael raised his hands, instantly stepping back. Richard was dragged away, cursing, his face contorted with the fury of a man watching his empire collapse. "Attempted murder," one officer muttered as the cuffs locked around Richard's wrists. "He's not talking his way out of this." The room quieted, save for Evelyn's sobs and Rusty's ragged breathing. Michael knelt beside them, his hand steady over hers as she tried to staunch the bleeding. Together, they held the trembling dog, blood seeping between their fingers. For a moment, nothing else existed, not the betrayal, not the danger, not even the flashing lights outside. Only Evelyn clutching Rusty, whispering love and desperation into his fur, while Michael's hand anchored hers. The confrontation was over. Richard Whittaker was in chains, but the cost lay heavy on the floor, bleeding and fragile. The night had delivered justice and fear in equal measure, leaving Evelyn gasping in the wreckage of survival. In the sterile gray of an interrogation room, Richard Whittaker sat with his hands cuffed to the table. His once polished appearance was ruined, shirt wrinkled, hair damp with sweat, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. Across from him sat two detectives, their voices steady, their questions unrelenting. "You poisoned your wife," one said flatly, sliding a photo across the table. Evelyn, alive, her pale face caught in a hospital light. "She's not dead, Mr. Whittaker, and your plan has already unraveled." Richard clenched his jaw, lips pressed so tight they turned white. He wanted to deny, to sneer, but every piece of his scheme was collapsing. The morgue footage, the toxicology report, the knife found in Michael Turner's home. Too many walls closing in. "Tell us about Vanessa Clark," the detective continued, leaning closer. "Your wife's best friend, the one you were seen with before and after the funeral." Richard's mask cracked. His eyes flickered and the silence stretched. When he finally spoke, it was not with bravado, but with the desperate resignation of a man cornered. "She knew. She helped. And Briggs, he's the one who got me the drugs." The confession was recorded, every word sealing his fate. By the end of the week, Charleston hummed with scandal. Vanessa Clark, once welcomed in the drawing rooms of the city's elite, found doors slamming shut. Her face, once adorned with society page smiles, appeared instead in headlines dripping with disgrace. Socialite Mistress exposed in poisoning plot. Invitations vanished. Friends turned their backs. She walked down King Street with her head low, whispers trailing her like a second shadow. Dr. Jonathan Briggs fared no better. Federal investigators descended on Charleston General Hospital, digging through pharmacy logs, Pyxis machine records, and security footage. The evidence was damning. Restricted anesthetics signed out under his name, vials missing without explanation. He was suspended immediately, his license under review, his career dangling by a thread. What had once been his triumph, ruining Michael Turner, now became his undoing. Henry Collins's toxicology report stood at the center of it all. His affidavit outlined clearly the presence of a paralytic agent, one that could only have been obtained through hospital channels. In the hands of police and prosecutors, it was irrefutable proof. The case was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was fact, documented and undeniable. Meanwhile, in the quiet refuge of Michael's home, Evelyn's recovery unfolded in small victories. The first time she stood from the wheelchair, her knees trembling, Michael steadied her by the arm. Tears burned her eyes as she took a step, then another, each one a defiance against the grave that had been prepared for her. "I thought I'd never walk again," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You were never meant to stay down," Michael replied softly. Her strength grew daily, muscles awakening, spirit unbroken. She had been betrayed, nearly buried alive, but she would not let Richard or Vanessa define her life. News reached Michael soon after. The hospital wanted to meet. He returned to Charleston General not as an attendant, but as a man restored. The board, once skeptical, now acknowledged the truth he had been wronged. They offered reinstatement, his license renewed. His title of anesthesiologist returned. The same halls that had cast him out years ago now opened their doors again. When he walked through them, coat crisp and head high, it was more than a job reclaimed. It was dignity, redemption, the proof that justice had begun to shine through cracks long hidden. In Charleston's oak-lined streets, whispers still circled, but they told a different story now. A betrayal exposed, of justice unfolding, of a woman who had risen from death's shadow and a man who had reclaimed his name. For Evelyn and Michael, the war was not yet over, but for the first time the balance had shifted. Truth was no longer buried. It stood in the open, undeniable, pointing toward a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. And in that light, Evelyn felt the faint but steady pulse of justice. Slow, deliberate, but finally undeniably alive. The weeks after Richard's arrest moved in waves, long, heavy days punctuated by moments of fragile hope. Evelyn remained at Michael's home, her body recovering with slow determination, while Charleston seemed to pulse with the echo of scandal. The Whitaker name, once spoken with admiration in polished parlors, now carried the sting of betrayal. Michael often found her sitting by the window in the evenings, the light of dusk painting her face in soft gold. She had grown stronger, able to stand with only minimal support. Sometimes she walked across the room, her steps shaky but defiant. Every stride was a declaration that she had been buried too soon, that she had risen when no one expected her to. One evening, as cicadas sang outside, Michael sat across from her. He had brewed tea, the steam curling upward between them. For a long time, they said nothing, the silence speaking of battles fought and scars left behind. Then Evelyn's eyes met his. "You lost everything once," she said gently. "Your career, your family, because someone chose to destroy you." Michael's gaze lowered to the cup in his hands. "And you lost everything because the people closest to you chose greed over love." He paused, then looked back at her. "But we're still here, Evelyn. Somehow we're still standing." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. The contact was tentative, yet steady, a bridge built from shared pain and hard-won trust. For the first time in years, both allowed themselves to imagine a future not defined by betrayal. Rusty, too, fought his way back. The night of Richard's attack had left him bleeding and broken, but the veterinarians at the local clinic worked tirelessly. Michael and Evelyn visited every day, Evelyn wheeling herself down the sterile hall until the day Rusty limped out on his own, tail wagging weakly. When he pressed his muzzle into her lap, Evelyn wept openly, burying her hands in his fur. "You saved me," she whispered into his ear. "Now we've saved each other." The dog became more than a pet. He was a symbol of loyalty that no betrayal could tarnish, a reminder that courage sometimes came in fur and fangs. Beyond the quiet walls of Michael's home, justice continued its course. Richard sat in county jail, facing charges that would almost certainly lead to decades behind bars. No fortune, No reputation. No allies remained to shield him. Vanessa Clark fled Charleston soon after, unable to withstand the stares and whispers that followed her through every street. The city that once celebrated her beauty now spat her name like poison. She disappeared into anonymity, her fall as swift as her ambition had been ruthless. Dr. Jonathan Briggs, once untouchable in the hospital hierarchy, stood before the medical board stripped of his license. His career ended in disgrace, his name marked forever as a cautionary tale of arrogance and deceit. Charleston society, so quick to gossip, now spoke of Evelyn with something like reverence. She had returned from the grave, not in rumor, but in truth. And in her return, lies had been dragged into the light. One evening, as the cicadas quieted and the first stars blinked awake, Evelyn stood in the garden. The wheelchair had been pushed aside. Michael watched her from the porch, pride softening his features as she walked slowly across the grass, Rusty padding loyally at her side. She stopped, lifting her face to the night sky, breathing deeply of the warm southern air. When she spoke, her voice was steady, clear, carrying across the stillness. Justice may come late, but when it arrives, it speaks loud enough. The words lingered, hanging in the air like a benediction. Michael felt the weight of them settle in his chest, not heavy, but grounding. He knew she was right. Justice had not shouted, it had not stormed. It had come quietly, inevitably, like dawn after a long night. Together, they had crawled from the shadows of betrayal into something resembling hope. Their wounds remained, but so did their strength. The morgue, the coffin, the poison wine, these would always be part of their story, yet they no longer defined its ending. In that moment, under Charleston's sprawling sky, Evelyn and Michael allowed themselves to believe in beginnings. 6 months later, Charleston bloomed beneath spring sunlight, azaleas bursting pink and white against the wrought iron balconies and moss-draped oaks. The scandal that had once consumed the city had faded into whispers, and in its place a quieter story began to take root, a story of survival, of healing, and of love rediscovered. In a small chapel tucked away on the edge of town, Evelyn Whittaker stood at the altar. She wore no extravagant gown, only a simple ivory dress that flowed gracefully to the floor. Her hair, soft and loose, framed a face no longer haunted by weakness, but by resilience. Michael Turner stood opposite her, his suit plain, his expression steady, yet moved in ways words could not capture. The ceremony was brief. A handful of friends, a few colleagues from the hospital, and Henry Collins, who had stood by them with truth when lies threatened to drown them. Rusty lay near the front pew, his chest rising and falling peacefully, the scar across his side hidden beneath his thick coat. Evelyn's hand trembled only once, when Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, his eyes meeting hers with a vow unspoken as well as spoken. There were no grand speeches, no orchestrated performances, only two people who had been broken in different ways, choosing to stand together, stronger for the cracks that had let the light in. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Evelyn's smile was radiant, not because of spectacle, but because of freedom. Freedom to live without fear, freedom to love without betrayal shadowing her steps. Weeks later, Evelyn and Michael walked through the sunlit halls of a Charleston orphanage. The scent of chalk and fresh laundry mingled with the laughter of children echoing down the corridors. Evelyn's heart tugged with every giggle, every small face that peeked curiously from behind doors. Then she saw him. Sammy Miller sat on a bench, a book too large for his small hands resting in his lap. His eyes lifted as they approached, and for a moment Evelyn swore the world held still. Michael crouched down, his voice soft but warm. "Do you remember me?" he asked. Sammy's eyes lit with recognition. "You're the man I told not to go to work." His tone was matter-of-fact, as though no time had passed at all. Michael's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to speak at first. Evelyn knelt beside him, her hand brushing gently over Sammy's hair. "You saved him that day," she whispered. "And in a way, you saved me too." The boy looked between them, something fragile flickering across his face. Hope, tentative and longing. Evelyn felt the rush of it in her chest, sudden and overwhelming. She looked at Michael, who was already looking back at her. In his eyes, she saw the answer to the question she had not yet spoken. Later that week, papers were signed. Background checks and home studies were expedited, the process moving with surprising grace, as though even the system itself understood what was meant to be. When Sammy walked out of the orphanage doors with a small suitcase in hand, Rusty bounding ahead to greet him, Evelyn's eyes blurred with tears. "Welcome home," Michael said, his voice breaking as he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Sammy smiled, shy but bright, as Evelyn knelt to embrace him. "You have a family now," she whispered into his ear, "and we'll never let you go." That evening, the four of them sat together in the modest house that had once been a refuge and was now a home. Evelyn prepared dinner while Michael helped Sammy set the table. Rusty lay stretched across the floor, tail wagging lazily every time Sammy bent down to scratch his ears. When they sat to eat, Evelyn paused, looking around the table. The man who had saved her, the boy who had warned them, the dog who had fought for her life. A family not forged by blood, but by choice, by battles endured and truths faced. She raised her glass, her voice clear and steady. Justice and love outlast betrayal. Even from death's shadow, life can begin again. Michael lifted his glass in return, his eyes shining. Sammy followed, grinning, his glass of milk raised high. Rusty barked once, as if in agreement. In that small Charleston home, beneath the weight of a past that had once nearly destroyed them, they began anew. And this time it was not with secrets or betrayal, but with the simple, enduring strength of love.